My name is Paul Willis. I'm the Rector of the Loddon Reach Benefice, and I hereby give full consent to Mothers Union to use the material in any way that they think might be useful to their project.
I'm Tarina Maguire from Cheveley. I've been involved with Stories on the Street as a coordinator, and I'm happy for Mothers Union to use this video material for whatever resource suits them.
My name's Debbie Johnson-Waite. I am a manager of Cafe in St Michael's Church in Spencer's Wood. I give my permission for anything that I may say to be used for the good of the Mothers Union.
Hello, I'm Andrew Proud. I'm Bishop of Reading. I'm also Central Chaplain to the Mothers Union, and I'm very happy to give my permission for you to use this video wherever and however you'd like to.
I'm Janice Proud, and I'm a member of the parish of Pangbourne, Tidmarsh and Salem in Berkshire, and I'm one of the facilitators for Stories on the Street, and I've enjoyed being part of engaging with that within our parish, and I give consent for this video to be used.
My name is Heather Thorne. I attend St James Church in Pangbourne, and with Janice, Philip and Heather we attended the Emoja workshops, which is now Stories on the Street, and I give permission for this video to be shown elsewhere.
I, Sarah Wheat, give consent for the Mothers Union to use this recorded interview for their own purposes.
So the question I'm going to answer first is, what has been the most significant change for you personally as a result of Stories on the Street? I suppose the most significant thing for me about the whole sort of adventure of taking part in this workshop was that it confirmed in me what I already believe is that we need to be working in community in collaboration with other people. So the significant thing for me was to know that there were, it's not a new thing, but that there was this resource workshop and resource material that would help to develop that in my own thinking in terms of what I do. And so the significant change, it's difficult to quantify something sort of in an isolated way. It's never quite like that, but it's more to do with the confirmation that there is a need to be taking this kind of approach to who we are as church seriously, looking outwards rather than inwards, how we engage with other agencies, other churches, and with the communities around us. So in terms of significant change, there's no significant change per se. There is just a continuation of that transformational thinking, which I believe it is. And sometimes when we explore the ways in which we can engage and collaborate, it's an imperfect art, and sometimes we can venture, if you like, or take a risk for the kingdom, and it can be in some perceptions a failure. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because failure can help and makes us who the people we are anyway. In our own personal lives, things happen and they inform who we are, and we learn from our mistakes. It's the same with this kind of sort of approach to being church, I think.
The most significant personal change for me as a result of taking part in the Stories on the Street programme was the confidence that it gave me to share ideas, and the strength to take them forward, I think, would be the best way to put it. Being somebody who's passionate about community, it was fantastic to be a part of a group of people who are also passionate about taking church into the community and bringing more people into the family. taking chances and risks with some of the ideas and listening to other people and things that they've done in the past and would like to do in the future gave me confidence to go forward with some of the ideas that had been working their way around in my head. So for that I was really grateful.
So I've been involved with Stories on the Street as a coordinator, and I've been there for all of the workshops, and there's been about 7 or more, each looking at different areas that would be useful for people to use within their church. And the material that's used sort of reaches everybody on different learning levels. So you could read a passage from the Bible, and that's great for some people, but some, like me, like things more visual. So therefore the different cartoons done by Bill or the drama pieces done by Jackie really sort of affected me and other people more personally. You really got into the emotion of the story, and then was able to take that further by working on how you could use this with the community, your church, and what way forward you could go from using that material.
So in terms of personal change, I want to tell you a very short story about using the material from Stories on the Streets in a very different context. I am the chair of the Council for Partners in World Mission in our diocese, and I'm the lead bishop on our link with the diocese in India, in Nandyal in Andhra Pradesh. And I went out earlier this year for a week to spend a week with the diocesan bishop there. The diocesan bishop there is a woman, and I know she'd been facing all sorts of problems. And I took session 5 of the course, which looks at the book of Nehemiah. And she and I spent 1 hour, 1.5 hour sessions together going through the studies in the booklet. And it was transformational for her and for me, actually. So it helped her to identify precisely where the pressure points were, where the issues were. And they were around the government at the moment in India, which is quite hostile to Christian communities and the Muslim communities as well. And what it was like to be a woman, and a woman who is ordained, and a woman in leadership as a bishop in a diocese where she is the only woman priest. And we had some fascinating conversations, and what emerged during that was her top priority to encourage young women in a culture where women, of course, get married very early and are subject to sexual abuse and violence, domestic violence and things, how to encourage them to be educated, to seek education, and to seek a very different kind of way of being, and possibly even to explore ordination in the future. And the other was just simply a way of helping her to develop strategies for coping with the very difficult political context. But as we were doing that, we were looking at Nehemiah, examining the walls and going back to the gates and seeing what was there. I realised that I was going back to my time in Ethiopia with USPG, and actually recognising that there's something of what I'm about now that I've not articulated that comes out of that time in Ethiopia and out of the things that I think I saw and understood as a USPG mission companion. So that was a deep meeting of two people from very different cultures as Episcopal colleagues, but looking very much at what God is calling us to do in the context that He's placed us, and that was very empowering for both of us.
My personal most significant change, I think, is confidence to engage in activities within the church context, and particularly in worship. The material from Stories on the Streets has just given me and the church tools to really engage with the church community, to think about how they engage with being salt and light in the world, how they can reach out beyond the church walls, helping people to just rethink what church is about. And as someone who's very shy, it's taken really good material to give me the confidence to actually do something that I'm keen and know that's important to do. But without the materials, I wouldn't be able to do it. So thank you, Bill and Jackie, for the materials you've created and allowed us all to engage with our communities better.
through some of the work that we did, some of the sessions that we had, was that isolation, loneliness, mental health issues, massive anxiety were issues that came up regularly when people were giving their feedback. And that's something very close to my heart. And I'm hoping that I can use some of my professional skills to open this up within the community more through the leadership of our church. I felt really enthused by the work that we all did together with the people coming from different churches, all their own different experiences, and working as a group with the four of us who went. And the work coinciding with other initiatives like prayer walks in our community, which really opened me up to a sense of parts of our community where we don't even seem to have much presence. We don't know them. They're often behind locked gates. And there's that sense that there are certain people who we don't know. We don't know what their needs are. And this is maybe an opening up for that.
So I would say the biggest change for me personally is that it's given me much more confidence to be able to talk about the true message behind the Bible stories. It's really helped me to re-engage with Bible stories, especially ones I thought I already knew, but it's really helped me to better understand the stories as they are relevant in today's world. It's helped me to understand why the church should be more relevant in our communities today, and it's helped to reignite that passion in me for working with people in our communities that don't really have a voice, and then to recognise all the resources that we do have and that we can give, especially if we work together and we can use that small amount of resource that we have to make a huge difference in our communities, especially to those people that really need it.
I think one of the other things that I enjoyed about it was the relaxed atmosphere of it, that actually everybody could make mistakes, and it is normally through learning and making mistakes that we have our best learning. And Bill and Jackie have a great sense of humour, not as good as mine, but still a very good sense of humour, and I think that really did bring everybody together and make people relaxed and be able to take ownership of the course and the material and going forward. And I think that, for me, is a better way of the church, instead of it being seen as a stuffy something that lives in the past, actually having a piece of humour and relating to people on different levels and actually really coming alongside people and showing kindness. I think Stories on the Street enables that.
Here again, it's difficult to say what is significant. What I can say is that in using the resource material, I think it's been helpful to enable people to think in a different way about what it means to engage with society, with the world, with the community at large, and to think in terms of who the church is, in terms of its identity. And part of it was we did some of this. I used some of the resource material in a church service. We followed it by a lunch, and it was it encouraged a reflection on things. Sometimes the demands of the world want immediate answers, and in a way the church is looking for those immediate answers too. What the material that has come out of Umoja or Stories on the Streets for me was that it encouraged longer term thinking, it encouraged deeper thinking, and that was really, I thought, really useful and a real gift to the church. So we had this Sunday where we did what I've just outlined, and it was what we decided to do was to have a look at one of the things was the history of the church. And when we began to look at the history of the church, that was funny in itself, because some people without one of our churches go back to 68, I think it is, and immediately went back to those times and wanted to progress a timeline from 1068 to the present day, which is totally impossible. But that's one of the things we have to wrestle with as a church, that sometimes there's so much history. It's where do you actually sort of stop that process and just, I don't know what I'm trying to say here really. But there was humour involved, and that's what I like about the church, this resource material too. It's not mundane, it's not actually tedious. It is actually something which you can enjoy to process that people engage with because of that. I think so part of what I'm planning for changing in the church next year is to use some of the monologues which were written as part of our Lent course. We've got some really good actors about the place, and I'm hoping that they will be willing to get involved in that way. So through Holy Week, perhaps have a performance a night centred around one of the Emoja monologue things, which I think are great, because it's about telling a story in a different way, and they do it so well. And actually, when Jackie performed these things, on every occasion I've heard her perform, for instance, the woman who touched Jesus' cloak, it's such a powerful thing, a powerful drama. It takes it into the context of a woman today. Really, for me, I think, who am I to say what takes anything into the context of a woman? I don't know, but it certainly made it more contextual to me and touched me deeply. So therefore, if it touches me deeply, this story that I know so well, then I think that telling that story to others has got to stand a chance of getting home to people at a deeper level than purely reading from the Bible script, which is not bad in itself. However, the way in which the monologue was written enlarged upon it in a way that made it accessible.
I don't know whether it was the most significant change for our church and both the community, I think. But the idea came about, a friend and I've organised a community carnival for the past 10 years, and the idea had been mulling around about we have to hire in a marquee and it's left on the field overnight, and the event happens on a Saturday, and how it would be quite amazing to be able to have a service on the field on the Sunday morning. It was never taken any further, and then after being a part of the Stories on the Street, and one of the things that we had to work on as a group was an idea that you might have for your community. So through doing that and working with a group of people from all over the place, the idea that I'd had was taken onto a piece of paper and thought about, which was quite amazing to see something that I'd even thought about being put on a piece of paper, and to have the whole idea worked through. What would stop it? What could make it happen? What would you need to do? Who would you need permission from? And so we spent a session on that, and that was the start of putting the ball, making the ball roll into this service happening.
For the church, I think the most significant change, church community that I saw, came from a worship session we did using Elisha and the widow's oil and some of the activities around that. And people really engaged, and after the drama we had a cross that was made of different people in different colours, and it was very attractive. But actually, out of those, in the different corners, people were invited to celebrate what we have. So there's our skills, our knowledge, our time, that sort of thing. And people who I wouldn't expect to be happy to engage in an activity like that in church engaged, the teenagers and youngsters. And it was really very significant for me seeing people working together and really enjoying it, as it was quite different from the usual worship. But really the most significant thing I saw after that was I had to give a notice asking for some help for an activity in church. I'm the organiser for Christian Aid Week in the parish and needed some help with the Big Brekkie, an opportunity for people to come together to engage with our community invite them in, as well as raise money for Christian Aid. And one of my 2 key helpers had got a clash and needed to go to a family event, a very special event. He was prepared to give up and not go, but it was going to see the film of Robot Wars with his son and grandson in Glasgow. So really special, but he would have given it up if we hadn't got enough people. And after that session, people volunteered to help. We had enough people to cook, to serve, to welcome, even to sit at tables and chat with people who were new. And these were people, some who'd volunteered a bit before, but people really were enthusiastic. New people volunteered and have got more connected through working together that morning and carried on being engaged with things more. So for me, the work material has actually allowed people to see that they've got skills and gifts and there are opportunities to do things, because it brings new ways of thinking, and all sort of from the sort of totally Bible focused as to why we're doing it and how we're trying to reach out. So that was the biggest change I saw.
Of course, as a bishop, I don't have responsibility for one community of faith, one church. I'm responsible for many. But what I can tell you something about is the impact of what I've seen in the group of people who've been coming to the Stories on the Streets training sessions over the 4 or 5 sessions that we had together. And it was marked, really, that during the time that we spent together, there was more laughter around, more confidence, more engagement with the questions and the issues, a willingness to participate, a willingness to try new things, to try out ideas, whether it's drawing them, writing them down, sharing a one-to-one, engaging in the Bible studies, thinking about the scrumping boy, the ideas. You come up with an idea and somebody wants to take the ideas away from you and deny what you're trying to do and where you're trying to get to. And it was just, we began to build a strong sense of just being a community. And I think that's invaluable at a time when many churches feel isolated, people feel isolated, Christians particularly feel isolated. And anything which brings people together and generates energy and enthusiasm has got to be a really good thing.
As for the changes in the church, it's difficult to talk about changes, but certainly we've had new experiences. To start with, we used within our services the activities that were presented in the workshops, and very particularly I remember one service, where we took it to 2 churches, where we had fantastic participation in forming the longest line that you can possibly make. And this dawning of the significance of how we can work together, how we can stretch ourselves as a community was really good. And I think that worked very well. The other things that we have developed in the church is the dramatised reading. And the last one we did, there was tremendous feedback. We did this as part of the context of a very meditative type of service. We had one reading done with straight from the Bible, and then we did the dramatised reading. And I think people really related very strongly to the dramatised reading. They could feel themselves in that role. And many people said afterwards that was really highly significant to them. So the material is extremely helpful. And so far as we've used it, which isn't an awful lot, but we have had some good feedback.
I would say that the biggest change I have noticed from people attending the course has pretty much happened every single time we've run the course in one way or another. It's been slightly different, but it always seems to happen. It breaks down these barriers that people have, that means they only focus on like negative things and where they don't feel that the church is that relevant in their community. I think the course helps people to reconnect to the Holy Spirit and to get that passion again to want to step out in faith. I think quite a few people come on the course feeling quite cynical. They don't really feel that they they've got the energy to re-engage with their community. But with the retelling of the Bible stories and all the simple, fun tools that the course gives them, it seems to reignite this passion in people, and it helps them to understand why they should be engaging with their community. And it helps them to recognise that they can have a significant role in bringing change to their community. I think it changes people's perspective from just focusing on the issues that they've got within their own church, such as like, Leaky Reef or something, and it helps them to look again at what's affecting their community and how they, as an individual or as a church, could actually be part of that solution.
From the workshops, it was to see that different churches and different people had different issues that they had to overcome. There were some groups of people there where the clergy was very much involved and positive and wanting to find new ways, but then there was some where they weren't really supported by the clergy and perhaps they didn't turn up to hardly any of the sessions, which was disappointing because you do really need everybody on board for you all to be singing from the same hymn sheet or whatever you call it, to go forward. So if used appropriately and everybody gets on board, it could be a real good vehicle for moving forward and finding areas of need in the community and ways to address those needs in a more current way for each individual area rather than a bog standard one size fits all.
Well, it depends how you define community, I suppose. One context is that Debbie and Barbara, who were the people who accompanied, or we did this thing together. I think it's made a difference to them in ways that it affected me, just broadening out ways of thinking, and one of the most important things about thinking is that it doesn't stop there. So you kind of create some kind of an idea or a vision of how things might be. Then the next step is actually to take a risk, to have an adventure, if you like, in the hope of some kind of transformation in the community, and that's what it's about, isn't it? I'm not going to say too much because Debbie was far more involved in that process than I was. But to see in Debbie and in Barbara, in different ways, a realisation of how the church might be, what the possibilities were, probably just met them where they were already in their thinking anyway. It just gave a vehicle through which to channel things. So that was good. And I think that will have an impact on the broader community too. I think that just takes its own time. So there's nothing specific that I can say or I would want to say. I think I'll leave that to Debbie, to be honest.
So, on the 17th of September, the idea of a service on the recreation ground in our village had been thought about, and permission had been asked of the parish council who the field belongs to, and the vicar of our church, David Little, and a group of us got together and invited the Baptist church locally to see if they'd like to join us in this venture for a shared service. We weren't ever sure how many people would take part or turn up. Some of the musicians came from this church and the Baptist church, and they got together and had practices. We moved the hay bales around. They turned up on the day, and so did the community. People out on the field walking their dogs came and joined us. The marquee was full. Music was played. There was food and drinks afterwards, and it was a really great sense of sharing in the community. It was wonderful to see it come into fruition after being an idea that was shared with the Stories on the Street groups, and to have that happen in our village. So I can only be grateful for the courage that I gained in being able to share an idea, not just with the people there, but with the people involved in putting it together. and that sense of community that came from that. There has been a bit of a knock-on effect since then as well. In this church in St Michael's, we are having a Christmas dinner on Boxing Day, and there are at least 8 members of the Baptist Church joining us for that. And I think that has come from the outreach that's happened in the community as a result of an idea wandering around a little head, and then the courage being taken it into action with a good group of people to support us through. So thank you for that, Stories on the Street.
So finally, how will this process, Stories on the Streets, help churches to grow? Too soon to tell, really. And in terms of numbers, I'm not entirely sure. Every church says it wants to grow. Not many churches actually want to change, which is always an interesting tension to have, isn't it? But from what I've seen, I would expect that what we will see is churches that will, communities of people actually who will grow in terms of confidence, churches that will grow in terms of their impact on the local community. And I think also there'll be some change, some growth in terms of depth of understanding, depth of confidence, depth of spirituality, as together people work on an external task. You can sit people down and you can teach them, for example, the Beatitudes, or teach them from the parables about how they ought to engage in the world around them. But knowledge is not behaviour. And so there's something really important about actually engaging in this process together to go deeper into our relationship with God and our relationship with each other, so that we can go deeper into our relationship with our local community. And that changes the way that we behave together and changes the way that we behave with the people amongst whom we're set, so that we're not seeing the church as somewhere that we invite people to come to in the hope that when they come they are going to be changed, but that somehow as we engage with them in faith and trusting that God is out there already working for change in this world that he loves so much, that somehow we will be changed in that process. And I think that's a space that's well worth watching.
The most significant change for the community, I think, is a bit early to say, because we've been really having the Bible studies and thinking about how we need to change and how the church needs to change, and beginning to do the internal change processes. And I think we're beginning to look out more, and we're beginning to think about, to really know why we're looking out more. So I think probably the changes are more within our church community, looking out to the community at large. And probably this shows itself in reviewing things, not just doing things as we've always done. Sometimes stopping things, sometimes thinking, well, what do we need to do to engage better? Do we need to go out more? Do we need to... just reflecting more and being more focused on being out and making ourselves accessible, which might mean not doing things in church, doing them somewhere different. And I think that's sort of a process that started and will progress as we take things forward. So at that point we will then see more impact from the community and what the changes are there, but really a bit early to see what the changes are in the community.
As regards changes in the community, I think probably the experience we've had now through the workshops, through meeting with other people, has been a renewed interest and heart for our community, and the real knowledge that we as the church need to be centre of that community. We know as individuals within our church, many people participate in other community groups and activities, and in our area we do have a lot of community events take place. So we are visible individually, but to be visible as a church community as well, that's slightly harder to look at the way forward with that. We have had some ideas. looking at what people have recognised as some of the areas of need in terms of the lonely, the isolated, those suffering with mental health difficulties, and that maybe we do have a role for that, and maybe we will be able to start a group of some sort which is enabling people to come together to find support for and ways of enabling them to live slightly better lives with less anxiety. And we think we may be forming a group towards doing that, but it's all in the early stages. But one of the things we are doing is that we are gathering information about all the community groups that do exist already, and because we feel that that would be a very important outreach, to be able to enable people through the church to know what they are able to participate in.
So I would say the most significant change is that members of the church have felt reconnected to their community, and they can therefore focus on being relevant and being a relevant presence in that community. We've had people using the community mapping tools to help them to make connections within their community. An example of this would be where a group of people went out and they were talking to older people who felt lonely and isolated, and they also spoke to a local independent cafe owner who really needed more community support. So they worked with the two groups to create a coffee morning on a slow day in the cafe, and they helped to get the older people over to the cafe on that day, which got them out of the house, and it gave them a chance to socialise and to make friends. In another community, the church recognised that where they are based, there's quite a lot of ex-offenders living in their community, but there's very little opportunity for them to find any work, and this leads them into that cycle of sort of reoffending. So the church also, they needed to have someone to look after their extensive church grounds, and so they've now decided that they're going to start working with the probation team to see if there was a way for them to employ someone locally who's an ex-offender and try and give them, not just a job, but more stability, yes, employment, but also to build that relationship with them so that they hopefully don't want to reoffend or don't feel they have to reoffend, and also obviously they benefit because the churchyard will look better. So yeah, I think that's been the biggest change, is people really understanding that they can have just small acts can have a huge impact on their community.
I think your final question actually was about the drivers for change, and I think that what's the critical here is personal change, because when people get excited about this program that they put together, when people actually get interested and they want to go deeper and find out more, they change in that process, and it's that's going to be key to seeing church growth and seeing growth in terms of impact also of the local church and the local community. So it all comes back to the person, and it's about exciting and engaging the individual, and I think that this process does exactly that.
To me, the Stories on the Street came just after the elections and the things like that, which really highlighted the disconnect between people on the margins, the fringes of society, and those who are well off, and how actually the church isn't always relating to it and knowing how to engage, and this just gives us tools to get involved and to learn about our community and to connect.
Sums it up. That's where I was coming from as well, I think, really, because I do feel we sit within our church buildings and we do a lot of individual things, but collectively, how aware are we of, as you say, this great divide that's happened in this nation and as it is across the world, and what are we actually able to do about it, especially given the sort of the demographic of where we live. This is something we need to work much harder on.
One of the things I've really enjoyed about Stories on the Street is how it's connected with other things, like the Thy Kingdom Come that the Archbishop of Canterbury had, and the Beatitudes that Bishop Stephen has had us focusing on. So, yeah.
Oh, it definitely fits completely within these other approaches that we're taking. And the prayer walk that came out of Thy Kingdom Come, that was moving, actually. And not some prayer walks, there were just two of us. But other times there was a large group of people. And it got people talking and thinking about what happens in the streets in our community. And then just having done, as you say, looking at the Beatitudes, those are the things which we should be living as Christians, and I think Stories on the Street gives us a format, to move forward to bring out these issues much more.
Yes, and it sort of fits with the sort of trying to be sort of courageous and compassionate, and the new diocesan themes.
Yes, I mean, when we discussed being courageous in our group studying the Beatitudes, that was really difficult to discuss in terms of collective courage. People could talk about individual courageous acts, but this idea of us as a community being braver, having more courage, being enabled to do that, hopefully by this new approach, is really quite exciting.
Yes, and the whole getting to know the community better, so that we can actually really engage, and is really helpful, because it just gives us the tools to engage.
That we're not just hidden behind our church walls.
Yeah, we're getting out there into the world.
Yeah.
I've been looking at the material, having had that experience out in India, and just wondering whether this material might be particularly well placed to be able to help us to work in parishes where there's a fair amount of social deprivation, to build the confidence of the local church to engage in the local community. Often in parishes where there's a lot of deprivation, people can see the deprivation all around them, but they have no idea how to engage in that. So there's a part of Reading, a long road, the Oxford Road, which stretches from the centre of Reading all the way out to the west. It's a long road, it's probably about a mile and a half long, and it connects 4 parishes together. We know that in that community there's a high turnover of migrants, many people who are there for only 6 months or so. There are people who have been trafficked and have been at risk of trafficking. We know there are people who are sofa surfing, all those sorts of things. And what we're doing is we're working with Reading City of Sanctuary to try and bring these parishes together to think about what they're noticing around them in the local area, and to develop some confidence in how they might respond as a church. But I think having just got people together and got them to talk together about what they're noticing, what I want to do is to offer this process, Stories on the Streets, to them as a way of building confidence in their churches amongst the lay people, to engage with those people who have a social need. So it's not a matter of the church saying, we can see this need all around us, this is what they need, this is how we can make their lives better. It's about building confidence in a local congregation, to listen to what people are saying their needs are, and working with them where they are, to address those needs, to turn their lives around, really.